Hi, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Please settle down. We're ready for our panel. My name is Jisha Menon, and I'm the director of the Center for South Asia. I'm also a professor here at Stanford in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies. A warm welcome to everyone here. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Professor Claiborne Carson, who has put together this entire event, and also thanks to Truman Chen, who has been awesome and helped us put this all together. The panel that we're on is going to be discussing the topic, what's left of Gandhi? And I thought this was an especially provocative title because it allows us to approach this question from a few different vantage points. Of course, we could think about the legacy of Gandhi, which is something that we've been reflecting on over the past days, and think about, how do we cultivate and nurture that legacy? We could also think of it as what is left of Gandhi, as opposed to, which sort of situates Gandhi himself as possibly as a centrist figure, and think of what may be a position to the left of Gandhi or left of the left. And also, I think the question allows us to, it sort of sounds a tone of melancholy, what is left of Gandhi. There's also that sense of loss that I think is hard to miss in the question, what's left of Gandhi. So to speculate on those questions, we have a very august panel with us. And it's especially interesting that we're here in the Bay Area and thinking about Gandhi in this global context, which I think is also really important because Gandhi is probably one of the most visible Indians who's very well known in the global imaginary. But he was also, of course, someone who was a great proponent of proximity and of closeness. And to, again, think about those questions, we have both Raj Mohan ji and Ila ji, who are kin, and close to him in that sense, but also Professor Aishwary Kumar, who has written about Gandhi and the spirit of Gandhi. So again, we have ways in which we can approach these questions through a kind of proximate register, even though we are here in this kind of global diasporic space. Let me introduce our panel. Dr. Ila Gandhi is the granddaughter of M.K. Gandhi, born in the Phoenix settlement in South Africa. She worked as a social worker. She was vice president of the Natal Indian Congress and served with the United Democratic Front and the Natal Organization of Women. For her civil rights work, she was subject to house arrest and banning for 9 years by the apartheid South African regime from 1975. She was a member of the Transitional Executive Council to establish a non-racial democracy in the historic election of 1994 that brought Nelson Mandela to presidency. She served as a member of the South African Parliament from 1994 to 2004, helping to deconstruct apartheid. She was the Chancellor of Durban University of Technology and has won many awards for her humanitarian work from the Indian government, an International Peace Award, and is honored as a veteran of the African National Congress. And her talk today is going to be called The Development of Spirituality in Gandhi. I'll introduce our other speakers as well. Professor Raj Mohan Gandhi, a historian, biographer, journalist, and peacemaker. Raj Mohan Gandhi divides his time between India and the US, where he currently serves as research professor at the College of Education, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In the 1990s, Professor Gandhi served as a member of the Rajya Sabha. His last book, published in December 2018, is Modern South Asia, a history from the 17th century to our times.
Modern South India.
Oh, Modern South India, that's right. A history from the 17th century to our times. Other books include Understanding the Muslim Mind, Gandhi, the Man, His People and the Empire, Punjab, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten, and Patel, A Life. And his talk today is called Gandhi the Dissenter. And our third speaker is Professor Aishwary Kumar. He's my former colleague here at Stanford and is currently a visiting professor in the Department of History of Consciousness at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and is also Senior Fellow in Human Rights, Constitutional Politics, and Religious Diversity at the Lichtenberg Kolleg, Göttingen Institute of Advanced Study, Germany. His wide-ranging intellectual interests include moral and political philosophy, constitutional theory and political justice, empire and liberalism, and the history of democratic thought and rights. His utterly brilliant book, Radical Equality, Ambedkar, Gandhi, and the Risk of Democracy, was listed by the Indian Express among the 15 most important works on politics, morality, and law to be published anywhere that year. He's currently at work on 2 monographs, the first titled The Sovereign Void, Ambedkar's Critique of Violence, and the second titled The Gravity of Truth, Disenchantment, Disappointment, and Democracy. So I'll request Ela ji to begin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. As was said, I'm going to focus on Gandhiji's spiritual development. And if we look at his, history, you would find that he went to London as, I think, a 19-year-old. And it was in London that he first began to read the scriptures. He read the Gita for the first time in London and joined the Theosophical Society there. And that's how he developed his spiritual understanding of the religious, different religious groups. When he came, after leaving London, he went back to India. And within 2 years or so, he then came to South Africa. And when he came to South Africa, he was brought there by a Muslim merchant. And he was encouraged to read the Gita, go to the mosque. And Gandhiji didn't see any problem in doing that. So he went to the mosque, prayed with them. He read the Quran as well. And within a few days after coming to South Africa, he went to Pretoria. And there he met the lawyers that he was going to work with. And they were Christian people, and they encouraged him to go to church. So he went to church, and he read the Bible. They gave him the Bible. He read the Bible, and he began to think about religions, the different religions, because by then he had read the Gita, he had read the Quran, he read the Bible, and he was, thinking, should I convert or shouldn't I convert? And he then talked to Srimad Rajchandraji and asked him a number of questions. And from that conversation that he had with Srimadji, he began to realize that there is no need to convert. You can be a good Hindu, you can be a good Muslim, you can be a good Christian, and you're still the same person. It's the values that you carry that are important. So he began to look at religion in a different way, moving away from religiosity or, the rituals and all those things of religion, and looking at the basics. What are the values that religion teaches you? And what is it that you get from spirituality? And for him, that connection between himself and God was a very individual thing. It wasn't something that you can do in a crowd. It was individual. Each individual has their own relationship with the Supreme. And it's whatever, he didn't describe the God as a particular, whether it was man, woman, person, a spirit, whatever it is that you believe in, that is your belief and your personal relationship with the Supreme Being. And that is what guided him through life. This is how I see it. There are two scholars here who might not agree with me, I don't know. But I particularly wanted to dwell on this because today, humankind is facing a huge problem of violence, problem of consumerism, problem of antagonisms between different faiths and so on, environmental problems, and problem of corruption. So when you look at each one of these problems and you think of the spiritual being, when Gandhiji made up his mind, each morning you get up in the morning and you decide on certain issues, what you're going to do today, how you're going to dress, whatever it is, all the decisions you take, if they are guided by some spiritual power that you have between you and the Spirit, then your decision is going to be different. It's not going to be the kind of decision that people take today when they make the decisions in terms of government, in terms of financial management, whether it is in your home, whether it is in the country, whatever it is. The decision that you take, if it is influenced by that spirit, then your decision will be different because you will now not be thinking just of yourself, what is going to benefit you, but rather of the total society. What is in the interests of everyone? Gandhiji did say, that when somebody asked him, how do you decide? And he said, I'll give you a talisman. And that was, and I'm not quoting him, so I'm not using the exact words, but just the gist of it, that if you look at the face of the poorest of the poor and think whether whatever decision you take is going to help that person, then your decision is correct. Otherwise, don't use, take that decision. So he talked about the poorest of the poor, and this decision was guided because of that spirituality that he had in him. So what I'm saying is that when we look at Gandhiji's greatness, when we look at the decisions that he took, the manner in which he conducted, the nonviolent struggle, you begin to realize that there is some spirit that guided him. And if we look at that spirit that guided him, then we look at the development of Gandhiji in terms of his spirituality. And that development spans right from the time he went to London to the time he came to South Africa and when he went back to India. There were many things that he talked about, religious groups, and he did not approve of group identity because he felt that the minute you begin to look at group identity, then you begin to have rivalry between different groups and between different religions and so on. Because you have different, denominations in every religion. Hindu religion has many different denominations, so has Christianity, so has Islam. There are different denominations. And each of those denominations are an interpretation of the same text. It's how you interpret that text. And this is what Gandhiji said, that when you interpret your text, nobody has the truth, the whole truth about what that text means. Your truth may be different from my truth. And so we have to learn to accept, for as long as the basic issues of humanity remains the same. So those basic tenets that guide our religion, those we all have to imbibe within us. But when it comes to details, it may be different for different people, the way that you interpret the text. So there's no problem in interpreting the text differently. You don't need to fight over it, nor do we have to fight over how we, perceive God. Different people, different religious groups, because they are all, some people say rivers to the same ocean, some people say paths to the same goal, whatever we want to call it. The thing is that all of us are looking for a path, and each religion gives you that path. And he also said that, if you don't have a path, then it is very difficult to have purpose in your life, because that goal, that path gives you the purpose. It's the goal that you want to attain, and that is the purpose to your life. So you need to have that path. Even if you don't believe in God, you still have a path, and that path is important. So that is, in a nutshell, the way I see spirituality, and I think that that is a very important lesson of Bapuji's, which often we sort of trivialize because we don't want to look at that spirituality in Bapuji's life. What we need to remember is that he conducted his prayers twice a day, and those prayers were in the open. They didn't, because he said God is not locked up in any building. So, you can't put him in a temple or put her in a temple or in a mosque or something. He is everywhere, in the temple and also outside, he or she. And so his prayers were outside, they were twice a day, and they were in all religious faiths. So it was the unity of all religions, but basic values which he talked about and which every day in his prayers were chanted, the 11 values that he had talked about. So, and it could be more than the 11 values as well. So my contention here today is that for the world, I think that this spirituality is an important part of our lives, and I think that every person, if we get back to that spirituality, then the next generation would grow up with that spirituality, and we won't have the kind of problems that we see today. Thank you very much.
Professor Raj Mohan ji.
Thank you. One of the images that people in India have of Gandhi today, image popularized by the government, is Gandhi with a broom. Swachh Bharat, to clean Bharat. It is not a phony image. It's a real, Gandhi was a passionate believer in cleaning your surroundings, your home, especially your bathrooms and toilets. But that is a partial picture of Gandhi's legacy and his message. There's another symbol of Gandhi, spinning the charkha. It's also correct image, a wonderful image also. Image of self-reliance. That every person, woman, old person, child, could spin and could look after herself or himself. And of course, the spinning wheel also was a way of bonding everybody in India. Those who could buy the cloth made by the spinning wheel supported the very poor persons who plied the spinning wheel. So the spinning wheel is also a wonderful symbol of Gandhi. And then there is another fabulous symbol of Gandhi. It's 4 words. It's Ishwar Allah Tere Naam. Ishwar Allah Tere Naam. That the Almighty may be known by various names. Of course, 2 names he mentions in this phrase. Ishwar is one that many Hindus use. Allah is one that many Muslims use. The Almighty is called by a variety of names. But although called in a variety of names, the Almighty is one. The all-loving, the all-compassionate, the Almighty is one. This is a tremendous idea that Gandhi reinforced. It's not an original Gandhi idea, but of course he passionately fought for it. And indeed today, very often in many parts of India, if you say Gandhi, oh yes, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam. But today I want to focus on another aspect of Gandhi, and as I make my brief remarks, it will become evident why I think this is an important element of Gandhi. This is Gandhi the Dissenter. Gandhi the Dissenter, and as Ila also suggested, he respected the truth in his own heart. He deeply respected the truth in his own heart. So this trait in Gandhi is a lifelong trait. When he was in London as a student between the ages of 18 and 21, he joined the Vegetarian Society. By the way, he was pleased to learn that there were many in London who were vegetarians who were not Indians. They were vegetarians. And he had taken this vow of vegetarianism, not with great enthusiasm, but he had taken this vow. But he met this vegetarian, and he joined the Vegetarian Society. And this had 2 leaders. There was a man called Alfred Hills, who was an industrialist, and a doctor called Thomas Allinson. And these 2 were leaders of the society, and Gandhi was a very active young member of the society. And Allinson had written a book for married women which advocated artificial birth control. Hills did not like this, and Hills wanted Allinson removed from the London Vegetarian Society. Gandhi opposed Hill's bid to remove the doctor from the society. However, as Gandhi would put it, quote, Dr. Allinson lost the day, and in the very first battle of this kind, Gandhi found himself siding with the losing party. Some years later, when he was in South Africa, he had a young white associate and friend named Symonds, S-Y-M-O-N-D-S. We don't have his first name. And this man Symonds, Gandhi recalls later, often humorously assured Gandhi that I will withdraw my support for you if I find you in a majority. And in 1906, when Gandhi journeyed from South Africa to London to lobby with British leaders for the rights of Indians in South Africa, Symonds went to assist Gandhi. And there he took down Gandhi's dictation, he typed countless letters, he affixed stamps, he posted the envelopes. In Gandhi's words, Symonds toiled for us day and night without payment. Not long after this, Symonds suddenly died. And Gandhi afterwards wrote of the sad parting at the steamer when he said goodbye, and soon thereafter Symonds died. But Symonds loved the dissenting Gandhi. Returning to India from South Africa in 1915, Gandhi anticipated not merely dissent but opposition. A young Gujarati named Indulal Yagnik, some of you Gujaratis may have heard of him. He became a great ally of Gandhi afterwards, a critical ally at times. He was left of Gandhi. And he asked Gandhi in 1915, within a few months of Gandhi arriving from South Africa into India, you have done this satyagraha, disobedience in South Africa. Will this work in India? Will you have followers in India? Will satyagraha have followers in India? So Gandhi said in 1915, yes, I'm confident. A following will come in. This is Indulal Yagnik in his autobiography. He quotes this. Gandhi told him in 1915, yes, a following will come in due course, but I do anticipate that a time may come when my large following may throw me overboard on account of my strict adhesion to my principles, and it may be that I shall almost be turned out on the streets and have to beg for a piece of bread from door to door. A few years after Gandhi said this, of course, his campaigns found an immense following. The 1919 Satyagraha against the Rowlatt Act, which threatened free speech, and then the 1922 non-cooperation movement, etc. These aroused unprecedented levels of participation and also marked by Hindu-Muslim partnership. So, I'm not going to tell the whole story, of course. In August 42, when Gandhi's Quit India call was overwhelmingly endorsed at a Congress assembly in Mumbai, a small group of 13 individuals, most of them congressmen sympathetic to the Soviet Union, left of Gandhi, voted against the Quit India resolution. Speaking after the voting, Gandhi started with the dissenters, quote, I congratulate the 13 friends who voted against the resolution. That is how he started his speech after this vote. And in those 1942 remarks, this is what Gandhi said at the Quit India rally in Bombay. If you want real freedom, you will have to come together and create true democracy, the like of which has not so far been witnessed. I've read a good deal about the French Revolution, he said. Jawaharlal has told me all about the Russian Revolution, continues Gandhi, but I hold that though theirs was a fight for the people, it was not a fight for real democracy. He continues, my democracy means every man is his own master. Of course, he also meant every woman is her own boss. 3 years later, after Germany and Japan were defeated, the thousands of people imprisoned for Quit India, tens of thousands of them were released. Independence was only now a matter of time. So was, tragically, partition. In February 1946, when over-enthusiastic patriots insisted that people they met on the street shout, Jai Hind, they insisted, shout, Jai Hind, victory to India. Shout, Jai Hind. Now wait now. Now listen to what Gandhi said. Gandhi promptly objected, saying, these are his words, inasmuch as a single person is compelled to shout Jai Hind or any popular slogan, a nail is driven into the coffin of Swaraj. In terms of the dumb millions of India. National independence was not going to be enough. As Gandhi saw it, the individual Indian had to be free to dissent. 2 months before freedom, after independence, just before independence was to come, Gandhi, who called God Rama, that was his favorite term for the Almighty, and he loved that name. This is what Gandhi said. If someone comes to me and says, will you or will you not utter Ram Nam? If you do not look at this sword, then I shall say, I shall not utter Ram Nam at the point of the sword. Continues Gandhi, if someone comes to me and wants to make me recite the kalma at the point of the sword, I will never do so. I will defend myself with my life. As freedom and partition approached, the old man who for 3 decades had steered the freedom movement was almost reduced to becoming a one-person army. On the critical question of partition, his advice was turned down, except for Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. By the way, another great fighter for nonviolence. You know, we are remembering Chavez, King, and Gandhi. Let's honor and remember Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan also. He was the only one who agreed with Gandhi. Nehru did not, Patel did not, CR did not, Rajendra Prasad did not, Maulana Azad did not, Acharya Kripalani did not. They all supported partition. They firmly rejected Gandhi's last-ditch proposal that to save Indian unity, Jinnah should be offered on agreed conditions the Premiership of India. Rebuffed by younger colleagues whom he had mentored for 30 years, Gandhi chose to back them in their dissent from him. They were going to run India, not he. He would not undermine them. Moreover, although he defended his positions with conviction, he knew he was not infallible. In 1909, in Hind Swaraj, he had written, quote, "No man can claim to be absolutely in the right or that a particular thing is wrong because he thinks so," unquote. Now today, 77 years later, individuals in India are bluntly told by a mob or by political leaders that they cannot decide for themselves. They must utter a slogan as ordered, eat as ordered, dress as ordered, speak a language as ordered. How India gets out of its present coercive climate is not easy to see. That climate is not confined to India. Ethno-nationalist domination, ethno-nationalist authoritarianism, where a racial or a religious group uses nationalism and state power to coerce other groups, appeals to many people in many lands today. History does not offer a clear roadmap for bouncing back to liberty and equality. But embracing the dissenter in Gandhi, the Ekla Chalo Gandhi, can only help. That Gandhi is more relevant today than the magician at whose call people came to the streets, left their jobs, or entered prisons. I suspect that Gandhi today may also want us to study other great dissenters, including individuals who faced authoritarianisms and totalitarianisms of an extreme kind, even if these are yet to descend on some of our countries. Dissenters, for instance, like the Soviet Union's Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Nazi Germany's Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who in 1934 almost came to India to spend time with Gandhi. So I'll end with that.
You can take your turn. I forgot to mention do you want me to say your? So Professor Aishwary will talk about Gandhi, dignity, and resentment.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. And it is, as all of us can imagine, extremely difficult, if not impossible, to talk about Gandhi after Raj Mohan Ji has spoken and Liji has spoken, but I'll try. And I'll begin where both of them begin, which is in London. In 1906, most of us will know, revolutionary terrorism was in the air. A few young men, Indian nationalists, extremists as they were called, had come together and just assassinated, the man's name was Madan Lal Dhingra, had just assassinated a British official in London. Hind Swaraj, Gandhi's legendary, most brilliant, most succinct text, and we cannot overstate the importance of this text in the history of 19th and 20th century political thought. It is as important and irreplaceable as it is precise and thin. It's very easy to read, and one of the important things about any such text is its moral complexity and depth is concealed in its profound lucidity. And the word dignity, on which I want to focus in my brief comments, appears in Hind Swaraj, or Indian self-rule, as it is often translated into, appears just once. And that is where I want to begin. The text is a dialogue between an editor and a reader. The reader expounds the position of a revolutionary terrorist who is proposing that India be freed through a use of force and violence. The editor, who responds to the reader, says otherwise. And there's a moment, there are many brilliant moments in that text. There's a moment where the terrorist, the extremist, the nationalist says, but what you are saying to free India without the use of force, something like that has never happened. Gandhi proceeds through a very philosophical argument about why nonviolence is a way, and then says, the kind of freedom I'm speaking of will actually let the English stay on in India if they accept what it is that we mean when we say India, which is an embrace of our intractable diversity. If the English are aware of that, if they embrace our diversity, they are no less Indian than we are. Mm-hmm. And the extremist says, but this has never happened in history. No other leader of an anti-colonial movement, and Gandhi is not yet the leader that he will become a decade later, has ever said to his colonizing master, stay on, because we are equal. And that thinking of equality in which the colonized can say to the colonizer, you are our equal, is what Satyagraha is. The awareness that there is an equality that everyone has despite their profound oppressive existence. The extremist says, but this has never happened in history. And Gandhi responds by saying, to argue that what has never happened in history, that we cannot accomplish ever that has not happened in history, is to argue against the dignity of man. What is this dignity that Gandhi proposes? And if I were to respond to Professor Menon's provocation, what is left of Gandhi, I would argue that this dignity, this ability to think dignity in the throes of our greatest servitude, is what is left in Gandhi. What is important about Hind Swaraj, and we have little time, so I want to focus just on this thin work, is that this is not a metaphysical text of human freedom. Gandhi is so important, and Gandhi today is left and alive because he thinks of our most ordinary virtues and vices. That our greatest feelings of hopelessness, of cynicism, of inaction, come from some of our most ordinary vices. And one of those vices, he says, is our indifference to cruelty. That it is all around us, that we can see it happening, that we treat our own, and he was talking about different ways of being a religious person. When the extremist nationalist in Hind Swaraj argues about protecting the cow, Gandhi offers a very simple example, and he says, are you going to actually tell me that Hindus never kill a cow? Because they do. They do too. And that cruelty goes completely missing from our awareness of who we are. Why is it that we don't see what is most cruel in our own behavior? Why is it that we are indifferent to our own propensity and temptation to relentless violence? Where does that blindness come from? That blindness comes, Gandhi says, from our perceived right to be always proven right about things because we are in a majority. History has shown, he says, and this is true of India today than perhaps any time in its recent history, the majority today fighting for not any basic human right or dignity, but simply for the right to be proven right all the time. The idea that we will never be wrong because we have numbers behind us. Gandhi has a very ordinary answer, and he says, history has often proven that the majority is wrong, and it is the minority that has taken the right position. I would go further and propose that we think of the minority anew, because what the kind of minority, the Gandhian minority, or the minority Gandhi has in mind, is the minority that becomes a minority not because it's outnumbered. This is not a small number. It becomes a minority precisely because it is willing to stand up courageously and fearlessly for truth. And once you do that, you're already in a minority. That minority would be the Gandhian minority. Critics of Gandhi often argue against his idea of truth. What is truth? In politics, everything is relative. We are torn by our identities. We are split along party lines. What is the nature of the Gandhian truth, and what? We understand that it has a religious value. We understand that that truth has a metaphysical value, perhaps even a ritual value. But what is the political value of the truth that constitutes Gandhian Satyagraha? Satyagraha, as we know, is Satya and Agra, truth and force. Now, what is interesting is Gandhi never lets go of this notion of force. Never says nonviolence is being forceless. In fact, to be nonviolent, to embrace nonviolence, is to embrace that force that even the weakest have. And that is his definition of force. And that force, he says, comes from truth, hence the neologism, Satyagraha. What is the political value of this truth? When today we cannot even agree that actually there is climate change. We cannot agree even that racism is a problem or caste inequality is a problem. We seem to believe in our moral hubris that we have solved those problems because we have made laws against them. And Gandhi says laws are not solutions. Laws are a scaffolding. What you need is a dispositional change in how we believe we can be equal. And how we can be equal is by being truthful. What is the political value of this truth then, if it's not relative, if it's not metaphysical either? It's neither this nor that. And Gandhi says, my truth is very simple. It is the refusal to submit or be mastered by or ruled by a regime that is anchored in lying and deception. I will not abide by a government that lies to its people, which is why he can tell the viceroy, you don't have to leave. You can stay. India is as much yours as it is mine, but you have to be truthful. You can't lie. And that rejection, that refusal to not lie and not submit, more importantly, not submit to a regime of lying is what Gandhi's truth actually is. Which brings me to the final remark that I want to make about Hind Swaraj especially. One of the great challenges of reading this important work, 1909, Gandhi is 40 years old when he writes this book, is that it is often quickly read off as a master text of nonviolence. Often those on left of Gandhi think that that text has no value because it says resist as much as nonviolence allows you to resist. And that misreading of Gandhi comes from a very simple fact, that Gandhi's today by his supporters, by his detractors, by those who refuse to read him but sit on a spinning wheel for newspapers. And Rajmohanji has already mentioned him, so I won't go that far. Forget that Gandhi is possibly the last century's, and this is what is left of Gandhi, is last century's greatest thinker of human inequality. That there is absolutely no one who thinks of human inequality as scrupulously as Gandhi does. And he breaks from all established traditions of thinking about politics. This is not because he thinks that inequality is distinct from violence. No. He goes a step further and says that inequality is the first step towards our cruelty. We need to eradicate inequality not because we are all born equal. Nobody argues more strongly against that idea. He knows we are not, that it is a human and a necessary fiction that we have decided to agree upon, that we were born equal. And he says that is where we take our first step towards cruelty. Of course, different people have read it differently and proposed different solutions. If you were a socialist and you need something and someone does not have it, you decide to take it away from those who have it and distribute it amongst those who don't. If you are a liberal, you think, I will create a market for this thing so much so that everyone can buy it. If you were a satyagrahi, you would say, if there is something someone needs and does not have it, I would cease to need it myself. And that rejection of need, that refusal of necessity as the guiding framework of politics, is perhaps what makes Gandhi the profoundest thinker of inequality. Think of that world, he says, where it is not choice, where it is not brute force, his expression, where it is not need or want, but actually our equality of not needing, our equality in not submitting to lying, our equality in believing that we will be ruled only by ourselves, self-rule, Swaraj. That world would be an equal world. And no decolonization, no change of government, no change of ruling parties would actually bring about that equality. That equality today is back on us, and that is our responsibility. So I'll end there.
Thank you all for those excellent and thoughtful meditations and really urgent summons for us to think about the legacy of Gandhi. One thing that struck me in all of your papers is that you're recuperating this sense of discipline in Gandhi and forcing us to think beyond nonviolence as something that's a kind of passive submission, right? To sort of remind us to think of the work that the spiritual power, Ilaji, as you're putting it, that it takes, that there is a certain kind of cultivation of that kind of discipline. Or as Professor Gandhi was putting it, the way in which you're sort of resisting that compliance, that desire to sort of just imitate without enforcing your own sense of judgment. Or as Professor Kumar was saying, sort of reminding us that satyagraha is in fact consists of these dual notions of both satya and agraha, which is force, that there is a certain kind of work that goes into this kind of capacity to resist, which is very deeply cultivated, that it's not just sort of relenting, it's a cultivated capacity to be able to resist that kind of compliance. So what I find really striking is that Gandhi, of course, emerges as much more than a politician or as a spiritual thinker. He is someone who's combining these two realms as a kind of political philosopher, someone who's both caught in the messy world of politics where you're sort of exposed, but at the same time offering this kind of spirit of vulnerability. So I would invite you, maybe to say a little bit about what is the work that discipline is doing in Gandhi as you're understanding it in your thoughts.
Yes. I would reflect in the following way on discipline as a necessary part of Gandhi's message as well as the evolution of his life. So there's a discipline in his own thinking, in his writing. He also wants discipline in his team, and he has a core team, he has a political team, he has a non-political team. Then, of course, in a way, all of India is his team, and very often they are pretty indisciplined. And there are moments, well-known moments, when he calls off a great movement because of indiscipline on the part of some of his soldiers. So both for himself and for his team and for his movement, this kind of discipline was absolutely at the core of his life and should certainly be part of our understanding of his message.
For me, Gandhiji's discipline, which he exerted in his ashrams, was a tremendous sort of organizational ability. Because when you look at it, in terms of time management, everything was done according to time. And that's how he had time for everything. If you discipline yourself and manage time, you can do all the various things that you need to do in the day. And I think that was one of the reasons why he had time for his grandchildren. I mean, when I was there, we had a particular time when we could go and sit with him and talk to him. And during that time, he gave us undivided attention. I remember that. I'm not sure Mohan Bhai, must have had much more time with him than I did. But when I was there as a 7-year-old, there was that particular time in the day that we used to, the children who were there could go and sit with him. So, and that was in 1947 when, things were really 46, 47 period when he was so busy, so many things on his mind, and yet he had time to sit with us. That can only happen with discipline. There was also discipline in terms of all the rules that he had. Today, people feel that rules are there to disobey, not to obey. I mean, everything, you look at the road rules, you look at any rules. People, the young people today find, pleasure in disobeying them because they think, now I've overcome because I've disobeyed this rule. Gandhiji's idea was, yes, you do disobey rules, but you disobey bad rules, not every rule. There are good rules and there are bad rules. And he said so. I think it was in Hind Swaraj, if I'm not mistaken, where he said this, that there are certain rules that you have to obey and certain that you don't. So I think that he was a great disciplinarian, and he believed in a disciplined life. And I think that if you begin to think that a disciplined life organizes your life better than a chaotic life, then you begin to appreciate it, because it's appreciation of discipline that leads to you leading a disciplined life. If you don't appreciate it and it's imposed on you, which is what often happens, then you want to disobey and you want to lead a chaotic life. And you feel that this is a burden, discipline is a burden. So I think each one of us needs to think about it and look at the advantages of leading a disciplined life. And that's when you, for yourself, will begin to think, yes, if I organize my life in this way, I would be able to get through my day in a much more positive way than having to have all the anxieties, because if you lead an indisciplined life, you have anxieties. And that leads to all the other things. Okay.
Did you?
Yeah, it strikes me that you picked up on that very oblique theme about discipline. Gandhi's thinking of discipline, and he spent years thinking about it, is phenomenal precisely because he delinks discipline from modernity. That it's not our being modern, or he does not understand discipline in the sense of we as moderns actually understand. It is not, it's a discipline rooted not in structures of coercion or power, especially parties, modern political parties and governments. It's a discipline rooted in self-knowledge. So when he, as Rajmohan was saying, this happens right after Chauri Chaura, when he withdraws, when his followers burn down a police station, killing close to 24 policemen inside, and he withdraws the non-cooperation, the first non-cooperation movement. One of the things he says to his detractors is, the first thing he says is, India is not ready. I had committed an error of judgment by thinking that we were ready to attain Swaraj through non-violent means. We are not ready. And then he follows it up by saying, I was not ready. It must have been my error of judgment to think that we had attained that level of mass discipline that a truly satyagrahic independence requires. And so what happens at that moment is a thinking of discipline that is now anchored in self-knowledge. Discipline is not about disciplining others. Disciplining is about turning all that force inside and inward. And this is why the Hindu right, which wants to appropriate Gandhi today, finds him also so uncomfortable. Because Gandhi's conception of Indian civilization is not that conception that they want to celebrate. It's a different kind of civilizational rule that he's thinking. I mean, the clearest expression would be what he calls the mastery of my non-mastery, that I embrace my vulnerability. And that in itself is the greatest discipline.
I think that's great, because it's sort of, I mean, I was curious about the concept of force and to what extent we could see it as this kind of discipline, you know, and how is he countering power with force, right? I mean, the sort of, as you're talking about the majority, how does he counteract the power of the majority with this kind of more ethical force of spirit, if you want to call it that. We can open it up for audience questions, if there are questions in the audience. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Sanjay Panda. I'm the Consul General of India in San Francisco. It was a very engaging discussion. There's an expose of Gandhi, which came as novelty, like a breath of fresh air. But I just wanted to add, and probably Professor Kumar, excellent ideas. But sometimes when you're talking about majority, minority, Gandhi's concept, I mean, it's Gandhian utopia. never really envisaged a political entity like the state, governance. I mean, he was, in a sense, like I mentioned yesterday, a philosophical anarchist. He says that if truth and nonviolence are part of me, if I follow a moral code of conduct, I don't need anybody to govern me. It will be self-governance. So in that sense, minority and the importance that Gandhi attached to it assumes significance. If you compare it in the concept of a state, governance, that won't work anywhere in the world. Because then obviously the majority, but it's a different story that if the majority is used like majoritarianism, that's a different concept altogether. But Gandhian utopia did not have this place. Now, on discipline, Gandhi, I feel, he thought when he said Chauri Chaura happened and he said India is not ready, people are not ready, and he said I am not ready. And he disciplined himself by going on fast. So his fast, purification, that also disciplining himself. So it's a different concept of discipline, Gandhian discipline, of what we are talking today. And sir, with due respect, I mean, this is dissension, wonderful Gandhian dissension and the present dissension, I find a little difference. Gandhian dissension and to dissent was actually to a cause, to a particular cause with a firm belief. Now, unfortunately, what is happening, any dissension is actually, it's a fashion. It's nice. When Swachh Bharat was introduced, for example, Gandhi's spectacles were chosen as the symbol with Swachh on one side and Bharat on the other. So some people commented, oh, that shows that is two sides. Either you can be Swachh or you can be Bharat. You can't be both. So this is dissension. Now, if I come up with a
you are popularizing that.
I'm sorry. I'm speaking for myself. I mean, I forgot for a while that I'm a diplomat. So I'm speaking for myself. I feel to dissent is it's fashionable these days because the media likes somebody who dissents. They do not like if somebody affirms and follows the path. So, sir, a few thoughts I thought I could just share with you.
Anupa, did you have a question? Let's just maybe take a chance to respond to that if you'd like, and then we can take another question.
Yeah, well, some people let me not speak only about India. You know, if we discuss the Indian scene today, it will be a very enjoyable, perhaps even a impassioned discussion. So let's speak about countries in the world as a whole. There are many countries in the world where dissent may be fashionable for a few, but it is sacrificial for many. It is a courageous act. It is a risky act. So when I mentioned Gandhi the Dissenter, I was not speaking of Gandhi initiating a fashion of dissent. Not just for a cause, but for the principle that the individual conscience has a right to express itself and to disagree. Yes, politically, a majority wins, comes into office, of course. But to express your complete disagreement, even with the majority point of view, is a democratic right, which Gandhi championed for his own country and for all the countries of the world.
I'll quickly respond to.
Well, we have one more response.
Just a response to the first question, because I think I agree wholly with what Rajmohan ji said about dissent. The Gandhian idea of dissent is inseparable from any democratic conception of politics. If you think you are in a democracy, the first right that rule of government gives you is the right to dissent. There can't be a prejudgment about whether this dissent is right or wrong. That comes later. The fact that there are people out in the streets in Hong Kong The fact that apartheid needed to be fought by any means possible. The fact that black students in Berkeley were willing to be pepper sprayed because some unarmed man in a wheelchair had been shot dead as a security threat. Those are real issues. They are not after a fashion. Swachh Bharat is not a resistance and not a dissent, it's a government program. It's a tragedy that we need such a publicized, overspent program where millions of dollars are being sent to publicize cleanliness. That's the failure of Gandhi. That is where we finally see why he's still so important, right? Not why he should be appropriated into certain projects, right? If we were so keen on, and I would go there where Rajmohanji very thoughtfully did not go, to the impassioned realm, think of Banaras, where the Ganges are supposed to be cleaned, and now it's 6 years, and I go to Varanasi, there's no change. I think the right to dissent comes as a critique of our stasis, our status quo. And democracy is anything but stillness. It's movement. That's what he says in Hind Swaraj. That Swaraj is not a stilling concept, it's movement. And I think if you understand that, and to that of government, Gandhi may have been skeptical about large-scale governmental projects like dams and so on, in which he differed from Nehru. Nehru would see a map of India and say, when I see a map of India, all I see are rivers that need to be dammed. Temples of modern India, right? Gandhi was completely, and you're completely right about that, but the man's influence in how India became, for example, non-aligned. We need more of Gandhi in the state than less. And he's more relevant than I think we believe. Yeah.
Hi, this is Rao Kalwala. I'm with the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial of North Texas. We have our board of directors here, Dr. Prasad Thotakura and other folks here. So in my mind, two questions come. We all know that Mahatma Gandhi was an ardent follower as a spiritual Sanatana Dharma and also Bhagavad Gita. So the two things come into my mind. Are we underplaying his Dharma, that through his letters, I see that he challenged Britishers that, hey, you're adharmic and you're doing, and second thing is, he was inspiring millions of people what Dharma is. So in that aspect, we talk only the truth. I definitely was a seeker of the truth, but also by reading his letters, it shows that he's a very much a dharma, follower of Hindu Dharma. And the second part of is that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches all about going for the war to Arjuna. Why Mahatma Gandhi did not choose to follow a violent way of winning this with the British? Thank you.
Okay, there's a whole book on this called Radical Equality, but I will let our panelists speak to this.
I think, firstly, Gandhiji himself, the way he interpreted the Gita, is not that there was a war. The war was inside. I said earlier, when you take a decision, how do you take a decision? That is the war that goes on inside you each day. So that is how Gandhiji interpreted the Bhagavad Gita, that it is not a historic book, or it's not an historic account of something, of a war. It may be, but he said that the person who wrote it, in that style, to him it indicates that it's more than just history. It's about each human being. Also, to sort of claim Gandhiji as belonging to just the Sanatana Dharma or any one particular religion is to do injustice to him. Because yes, he did believe in spirituality, but he, if we listen to that text, that there's one text that is available on the YouTube, on internet, where he talks about religion himself and his spirituality. If you listen to that carefully, his spirituality is all-inclusive. He is not exclusive. And this was the beauty of Gandhiji. This is the legacy that he's left for us. The holistic approach that he had, the inclusivity that he had about everything, whether it's religion, race, humanity, everything. It was about looking at the totality and including everything in order to, to interpret the world, how you look at the world. That was his philosophy, an inclusive and holistic way of looking at life. Sorry.
May I also come in on
Yes,
this?
yes.
Yes. Incidentally, Gandhi, in my understanding, was not an absolute pacifist. He never said, never, 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 ever take a weapon. He did not say that. A very important understanding of Gandhi's view on the limits of the use of violence. During the killings, 47 killings, some Sikhs were asking him about the kirpan, which is a very sacred thing for a Sikh, a religious duty to carry a kirpan and, if need arises, to use it. So this is what Gandhi said. These are not his exact words, it's more or less his exact words. A sacred thing like the kirpan adorns its possessor, its user, only when it is used with extreme restraint and against very difficult odds. So he is asking for very great restraint in the use of physical force. Now, if you take the argument about a righteous war, if there is a terrible enemy, Krishna says, fight, even if it's your relative, fight, wield the weapon. The problem with using that logic indiscriminately is that we regard every conflict as the ultimate righteous conflict. Who is to decide? There's so many conflicts in the world. So I think my understanding of Gandhi's view, and I think a common sense view is, yes, of course, if the innocent are in danger, if children are in danger, if women are in danger, if the very poor are in danger, then the state or society should be prepared, using maximum restraint, even to use force against somebody who's oppressing the vulnerable and the weak. That is the understanding. But if we say that every fight, whether it is Tamil Nadu versus Karnataka over water, or any other fight over any other issue, is a call for violence, and we invoke the Bhagavad Gita for that, I think we are doing both the Bhagavad Gita and Gandhi very great wrong.
Raj Mohan ji, thank you so much for reintroducing the iconography of Gandhian dissent. Professor Kumar, I'll quote you, perhaps verbatim, I may have missed a word or two. Gandhiji was the 20th century's most scrupulous, most profound thinker of human inequality. So I'll frame my question in the context of the right and duty to dissent when confronted by human inequality. So what is it about us, all of us, our human condition? Gandhiji was just another man, another person, another woman, like all of us. What is it about us that we cannot approach his scrupulous approach to human inequality? Is it our complacency, our comfort? Is it our compartmentalization? Is it our cowardice? Or is it some other C-grade character trait? I know this is both a comment, but it's also a question, so I'll open it up to you.
Yeah, go for it. Are we taking?
Oh, sure.
I can.
Yeah, let's.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Professor Kumar.
Rajmohan, connect. Yeah. It connects also in a very strong way to the previous question. And the Bhagavad Gita is interesting because you bring up the question of duty. It is important to remember that when Gandhi reads the Gita and he writes several texts, including some when he's in the Yaravara prison, where and so on, he asks a very simple question: why is it that after being or spending your lifetime being a warrior, Krishna is telling Arjuna, are you today suddenly trying to be non-violent? What is the cause of this sudden attachment to not going to war when you have actually been a warrior all your life? The cause of shirking away from this duty, call of duty, this moment of truth for you, is not that you are non-violent. On the contrary, you are trained in the art of killing. It is that suddenly your own attachment to kin has made you or compelled you to recoil from what is your sovereign duty. And that sense of duty, when it balks under the pressure of kinship, I do not trust the fascists, but I'll forgive if my parents trusted one. Right? That to justify, it begins with us. And we begin to move towards those sorts of moral compromises from that simple weakness. Arjun is not simply a warrior. For Gandhi, Arjun is a metaphor for human frailness, fragility. And Krishna is a reminder of Arjun's moral strength and stamina. That's how he reads the Gita. The Gita is, of course, several texts to several people. But now, to come more directly to your question, why have we become this? For me, Gandhi's awareness of inequality comes to a single conclusion, that it is our indifference to, not inequality, it's our indifference towards the very question of why is it that we should be equal at all, right? When I was growing up in it, there would be families, and we are all aware of this. Usually it's the Mali's, the gardener's son, that brings you the morning flowers when you pray. So the kid comes running, plucking fresh flowers for you. Now you're just taking a shower and everything. You'll take the flower, try not to touch another human being. Right? You will take the flower from his hands, but not touch another human being. This awareness of what touching and not touching is, that becomes ingrained as a habit. B.R. Ambedkar has a brilliant example of this too, very, very similar, where a doctor in Bombay Presidency enters the house of a woman who's almost dying. She needs treatment. The doctor enters the house, and as he's trained, wants to treat her, suddenly realizes she's achut or untouchable, and hesitates and says, at this point, the limits of my duty have arrived to wake me up. I can't touch you. I can't treat you. That is not a moment of tacit, blood-spilling violence. That's a moment of our moral hesitation. And our inequality, our indifference begins from that kind of mechanized hesitation. Is it as if we have spent our lifetime ingraining in ourselves the habit of this hesitation? Satyagraha is our freedom from that regime of habit. And I think we become more aware of, we become more equal. And Gandhi is a very simple, again, ordinary solution. To become equal is to first become aware of where our inequality begins. The solution is not in large-scale projects. The solution is not in, as some years ago we would think, was in democratizing the flow of information. Then became what with fake news, then deep fake news. I mean, we multiply our methods and technologies of lying, right? because we are unaware of that first step we once took. Arjuna is that first step. And Gandhi's reading of the Gita extracts us from that first hesitation towards violence.
May I make one more comment? It's partly in relation to your question, but partly in relation to an earlier question, a brief one. It is indeed true that many of us in India, and our tradition teaches us, and perhaps that we are receptive to ideas of all kinds. That it is said, and with some truth, that for many of us in India, tolerance and acceptance of other ideas comes quite naturally. More Hindus are willing to say that there is great truth in all the religions of the world than others are willing to say. But let us, and now I'm speaking more about Indians in general, but it may apply to other countries too. Why is it that we are tolerant of the ideas of Christianity, the ideas of Islam, but not tolerant of Christians and of Muslims? I think that is a question we have to ask. I'll stop with that.
So there are lots of hands. I think we'll just take one final question. Anuba?
This was a remarkable panel, and I'm very grateful. Sorry, I was back here. But as someone who works at an institute that's devoted to nonviolence and sustainability, it feels like it wouldn't feel right to me to not speak about Gandhi's contribution to the need to think about sustainability at such a perilous time in terms of the planet's carrying capacity. And the thing that you said, Ilaji, around like thinking of discipline as a gift or something that we could, the discipline of constraints is something that will be critical for us to survive as a species or to pass on the gift of survival to the generations to come. It would be meaningful to me to hear any of your reflections on Gandhi's relevance to that today. Thank you.
Let's take one more question. Anuba, why don't you take the mic? And then I'm afraid we'll actually have to wrap it up because we're out of time. But let's take one more question.
Hi, thank you. This was a wonderful panel. In the spirit of taking a cue from Professor Gandhi and Professor Kumar, I'm going to be a little dissenting here. Not, I hope, in a fashionable way. But my question is basically about what we have been hearing here is this story of Gandhi as this magnanimous and very this complete figure who thought things through. And I'm wondering what were, from my own readings and studying with Professor Kumar, what were these moments of inconsistencies in Gandhi? What were these moments that he was not necessarily, he struggled? How could we think of him also as a figure who was not necessarily so sorted in his political action and in his philosophy? Could we have some examples or some of his philosophies that he talks about? One of the things that I was thinking about was how he constantly argues for transcending his immediate environment for this larger cause. At the same time, there's so much focus on the self. And so could we have some examples from your personal as well as personal knowledge of Gandhi as well as of his philosophy, of his inconsistencies, some of his inconsistencies? Thank you.
So can I talk about, I think that I'll try to answer that question about sustainability. I think, his idea of sustainability is a great lesson for humankind for today because, he talked about cutting down on your needs. When he began to lead a simple life, he cut down on how much he needs. How much do you consume? And what we find today is a culture of wanting more and more. Nothing is enough for humankind. And once we believe in or we lead that kind of a life, then you have a lot on the one hand and you have nothing on the other hand. So how does one have not equal but equitable, where everybody has access to basic necessities of life? How does one create a society like that? And one can only create a society like that if people begin to understand and realize that they cannot go on consuming and accumulating, because it's not only bad for the present generation and having an equitable society, but it's also bad for the future generations, because we are taking away all the resources of the world and we're leaving nothing for the next generation. We're not thinking about them. So sustainability is about that discipline to begin to think that, this is enough for me. It'll meet my needs. I'm not going to consume more. I can give that extra bit to somebody who needs it. And if each human being does that, we won't have the super wealthy on the one hand and the people who don't have any access to anything on the other side. So this is, thank you for that question.
So we're all out of time, so please.
Sorry. No, first question.
Please.
If we are out of time,
we'll
Let's answer
give it
the.
yes. We'll have a couple.
I'll give a couple of minutes to you. So on Gandhi's inconsistencies, and there are many of them, please read my books. My very large book, Mohandas, has enormous examples of his inconsistencies, and a shorter book called Gandhi the Good Boatman also has. So you can read those. I will say this, however, that many of his inconsistencies are known to us because of his own writing. Yes. The way, for instance, his treatment of his wife, his treatment of his sons, some very harsh, you might say, unfeeling conversations that he reports. But Kasturba never spoke about those things. We know about those things because Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi wrote about it. And we also know that at least in some cases, when he related those stories, so he related them sometimes with tears in his eyes, about his sense of how terrible he had been. So to know that Gandhi was a human being who made many serious errors, who was often harsh on people, there is no better critic to go to than Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi himself. But,
Quickly, because we've run out of time, and this is an important and a big question, I will say that there are rarely thinkers, and I think Gandhi is a thinker, a moral and political thinker, who fail with the kind of momentousness that Gandhi does. I think what is worth salvaging in Gandhi, what is retaining in Gandhi, and how much of it is really worthwhile today, is not because he's a consistent thinker, and Rajmohanji is right, much of it comes to us through his autobiography. I mean, one of the things about my experiments with truth as a text is that it betrays all future biographers of Gandhi. They have nothing to find that is already not the pushing of Kasturba because she refuses to clean the toilets, then his moral recovery from that shock that he had behaved like that, and so on and so forth. So those personal inconsistencies are very much the humanizing element of Gandhi. His political inconsistencies are those that have had a greater impact. And this is why I think being disappointed in Gandhi today is more necessary or important and more powerful than being euphoric about others. Because the way he thinks about his own failings has a lot left in that too.
Thank you all for an excellent panel.
Here, let me help you with